No, we do that. Eric Passanante, let me just introduce you. Eric Passanante is a very good friend of mine and a dear colleague. He's a regional, you're a vice president now, right? Senior vice president.
That sounds even better. You just promoted me. I'll take it.
Fantastic. With Prudential annuities. Eric and I worked closely together for many, many years. And I'll turn it over to him.
Thanks, Vlad. I'll keep it very brief, other than to say thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak to your customers. You know, we've been doing these programs for the last couple of years now. So just to get a little bit of background, so Prudential offers products and services that we deliver through Vlad's partnership with our organization, and we're proud to work with Craner and Vlad and his team. As Vlad mentioned, it's been a long-term relationship that goes back many years, and while we're not going to be appropriate for all situations with his customers, we do try to provide more predictable outcomes for investors.
Was born. So what we're going to talk about today are all of the things that you can do, again, on an individual basis. So outside of all of your financial institutions, outside of what all of the major companies that you do business with are doing to protect your information, there are also things that you can do in your own home on a day-to-day basis to also keep track and better protect your information. And that's really what we're going to focus on today. This is really what we're going to go through this afternoon. And so today, what we're going to talk about first and foremost is really what's changed within this space. Identity theft is not a new type of crime. We've been seeing identity theft occur for years, if not decades. But what's changed is the prevalence of how often identity theft is occurring. And so we'll talk about really what's changed within that space. Then we'll talk about ways that we can deter against identity theft. So again, things that you can implement immediately to help keep your information a little bit safer and a little bit more secure. And then we'll talk about ways that you can detect against identity theft. So this is probably the #1 question that I receive. You know, how do I know if my information has been compromised? How do I know if somebody has opened up any fraudulent accounts in my name? So we'll talk about where you can go and how you can monitor that information as well. And then lastly, how can you defend against identity theft? So if you did everything that we talked about today, but your information was still compromised, where can you go? What can you do? How can you mitigate those losses and get back to where you started as quickly as possible? So now what I always do for my presentations is start out with a trivia question. And I know asking trivia questions over webinar is so painful. So what I'll do is I'll ask the question. I won't ask anyone to answer. Just think about it to yourself, and then after a couple seconds, I'll just give you the answer just to make things easy. But the question that I always ask is, when was the World Wide Web created? What year? And the reason that I ask that question is because we normally get a very wide variety of answers. And the reason that it's important to have a good idea before we start this presentation as to when the World Wide Web was created is because that's really the reason for all of our problems, right? That's what's changed within this space. Again, identity theft is not a new crime, but the prevalence at which it's happening is certainly unprecedented. And the reason for that is simply the internet. We now do anything and everything on the internet, and for a lot of us, we don't fully understand what we're doing, and we don't always fully understand the information that we're exchanging when we do these normal day-to-day activities on the internet. And so the answer to the trivia question is 1990. The World Wide Web was created in 1990, and they give credit to a scientist named Tim Berners-Lee, who created the internet as a means for him to share his research findings with other scientists. So fast forward today, and again, 95% of Americans are online today. And I don't know about you, but it's almost impossible to get 95% of Americans to do anything. They never agree on doing all of one thing together, but 95% of us agree on the internet. And we really need to understand understand what type of information we're exchanging when we're using the internet in order for us to really keep track of our information better than we have in the past. So when we talk about all of this information, there's two different types of information that we exchange on the internet. The first is active. Active information is all of the most common things that we do, and it's all of the things that we know that we're doing. So in 2019, they did a study, and essentially they tracked all of the active information, and they broke it down into this little chart that you see here. So in 2019, essentially what this chart is telling us is that every minute in 2019, we sent 18 million text messages. We sent 188 million emails. And then one of my personal favorites over here, we spent over $996,000 in online shopping every minute in 2019. And again, this is the active information, right? So you know you're sending that text message or that email. You know you're typing your credit card information into that online order purchase. But there's also a lot of passive information that we exchange on the internet without necessarily even realizing we're exchanging that information. And this passive information can be very dangerous. Now, one way to help you understand what this passive information is to give you an example. And the easiest example of this is, how many times have you ever gone to a website, right? Maybe you are browsing for a family vacation that you're trying to plan. Maybe you're buying flight tickets or airline tickets to go visit a friend or a family member. I know some of those things seem so foreign to us here in this pandemic, but at one point in time, we were able to travel. And so when you're doing all of this research, right, when you're trying to figure out where's the best place to go, when's the best time to go, how can I get the best cost, what happens is all of that information is being tracked, right? This is the passive information. And so the example is, when you go and you're doing your Google searches and you're looking for the best vacation destination, if you don't book that vacation, or if you don't buy those flight tickets, and you go back to your computer a day or two later, or even an hour later, what you'll notice is that now all the advertisements that you've seen are now geared towards that family destination that you were just browsing, or those flights that you were just peeking. And again, that has to do with the passive information. So we think when we go to Google that it's free, right? We don't have to pay anything. We get our answers and we can move on. But the reality is that when you are not paying for something physically with cash or with money, then most likely you are paying for it with your data. There was a really great quote from the most recent documentary on Netflix. It's called The Social Dilemma. Highly recommended to anyone who has Netflix and can watch. But essentially, one of the quotes from that was, if you aren't the product, then you are, if you are not the ad, then you are the product. And essentially what that means is, when we're using all of these sites, if we are not paying to use that product, then we are the product ourselves. And that is why you don't pay for Google, right? Because they are tracking and collecting all of your information. You're not paying money because you're paying with your data. You're paying with your information. And so a lot of times when we go to these sites, they're tracking, you know, when you go to Google, they're tracking what websites did you click on? How long did you stay on those websites? Did your mouse accidentally hover over any of the advertisements on those websites? They're also tracking information from your IP address. And your IP address can contain some personal or demographic information about yourself, most specifically where that computer is geographically located. And so as we go through the presentation today, what we want to be able to do is show you different ways that you can help minimize the amount of passive information that we are exchanging, to help you minimize the amount of information that is constantly being changed of hands on a daily basis when we're using the internet. Now, we also know that there's more to the internet than a lot of what we see on a daily basis. And typically what we see as far as identity theft is concerned are all of these major data breaches. And if you look at this slide here, what you'll notice is that we have a graveyard of all companies that we recognize, that we do business with, that have all experienced some type of major data breach. And again, this is only just a few. There have been, just in 2019 alone, over 8,500 major data breaches. And every time we experience one of these data breaches, we lose another piece of our personal information. And so again, we need to make sure that we're protecting ourselves when these companies can't protect our information. And one thing that we want to make clear is that you can be a victim of identity theft regardless of where you are at within the life cycle. Now, I think for a lot of us, we tend to have this impression that only older people are victims of identity theft. And in a certain sense, that can be true. Older people are more susceptible to certain types of scams, certain types of frauds. But the reality is that you can be a victim of identity theft regardless of how old you are. We know right now that children are being targeted 10 times more often than adults for their social security number. So again, it's important to really make sure that you are aware of this regardless of how old you are. And for our sandwich generation, it's going to be tough on you because you're going to have to worry about protecting your kids, but also your older loved ones, and then yourself, of course. So as we go through the presentation, we'll give you different tips and tricks for protecting yourself at different stages of the life cycle, or rather protecting your family members. So let's jump in. How can we deter against identity theft? So what you see here on the screen is shredding your documents. And now, to be honest with you, I know that this is not groundbreaking information, right? We've all known that we should be shredding our documents. But we also know, based on statistics, that a lot of us are not shredding our documents. And we know that because criminals are still able to go through junkyards, they're still able to go through dump sites and your trash, and they're still able to find things that have information of yours available, right? Whether it's full name, address, account numbers, all of these things are still able to be picked up and scavenged from pieces of mail that we are not disposing of properly. Now, one way to help protect yourself is just to eliminate some of the mail that's coming to our house on a day-to-day basis. We receive about 41 pounds of junk mail, which is, in my opinion, way too much junk mail in a given year. And one way to minimize the amount of junk mail that we're getting is to opt out of all of these pre-approved credit card offers. Now, one way to do that is using this, the website that you see here on the slide, www.optoutprescreen.com. Now, this is the do not call list for pre-approved credit card offers. I've personally registered for this, and I have not received one offer since I've signed up. Now, when you sign up, you have the ability to opt out either for 5 years or indefinitely. Now, keep in mind, if you're going to do this, you must do it for you and your spouse. It's done by Social Security number, not per household. So if you live with someone, children over the age of 18, an older relative, a spouse, whatever the case might be, you'll need to do it for all of the people in your house over 18 in order to make sure that you really are not getting any more of these pre-approved offers. All right, let's talk about our cell phones for a couple minutes here. First and foremost, anyone on the call today that has a smartphone, it is imperative that you have a password on your device. Now, for most of us, we have these PIN numbers that are our protection for our device. And most of us have a PIN number that's either 4 or 6 digits long. Now, one thing that we know about criminals is they've really started to use algorithms. They've really started to get quite sophisticated in their hacking attempts. And so now what they're doing is they're using algorithms to guess our passwords. And so these algorithms have become very sophisticated. And just to give you an idea, one of these algorithms could crack a 4-digit PIN in less than 1 minute. It can crack a 6-digit PIN in less than 1 hour. And the reason for that is because when we're setting these PIN numbers on our cell phones, typically we're only using numbers. And when you're only using numbers, there's only so many possibilities of what that 4 or 6-digit PIN can be, which in turn will make it relatively easy for this algorithm to guess passwords over and over and over again in order to figure out what that 4 or 6-digit PIN can be. So because our phones have so much information in them, it's important that you protect your phone. And one of the ways to do that is to create a password that's a combination of numbers and letters. Because what that will do is that will increase the number of possibilities of what that password could be, which in turn would make it much more difficult for any algorithm to crack that password. So again, we encourage you to change your password to a combination of numbers and letters. I believe if you have a phone anywhere from 2015, 2016 and forward, you should be able to implement this regardless of the carrier or the provider that you have. Now, the second thing I want to talk about our cell phones is our location services. Now, for a lot of us, every time we download an application, it asks us to share our location with that particular app. And for the most part, we tend to just select agree and not necessarily think twice about it. I would urge you to highly consider the applications that you are allowing access to your location. And the reason for that is because recently the New York Times came out with an investigative article. And essentially what they did was they read all of these user agreements for all of these different applications that we use on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things they uncovered was that within these user agreements, these apps are telling us, hey, when you agree to share your location with me, in my user agreement, which you've agreed to already, everyone selects yes, even though most people don't read them. In that user agreement, we are telling you that we have the right to sell your information to up to 30 additional companies. So you agree to share your location with just one company, and they're telling you, oh, but we have the right to sell that to up to 30 other companies. And what the New York Times concluded was all of these companies selling your data to all of these other companies and sharing it and selling it. Essentially, what they've concluded is that these companies can ping your location every 18 seconds. That means that with all of this data being collected, they know where you are every 18 seconds. So in theory, they know where you live, where you drop your kids off to school, where you go to work, your favorite place to go to lunch, where you work out, right? Where your dry cleaners is, your favorite restaurants, where you pick your kids up, where they go to sports practice or tutor or music lessons, where your closest friends and family members live, the places you visit most frequently, how often you go to the grocery store, right? They know all of these things about us. And to a certain point, it might not be that dangerous, right? It might not be a big deal if companies know that you go to the grocery store 3 times a week. But depending upon who has access to this information, depending upon who can get their hands on this information, depending upon if these companies are taking care of this information the way that we hope they would, poses all different types of questions and risks. And so what we recommend is that you go through your list of applications on your phone that you've granted access to your location and remove the access to any application that doesn't need your location. Most applications do not need your location to function properly. And again, I would encourage you to go through your list and remove any access of an application to your location if it does not need it. We know that some applications really do need access to your location in order to work properly, right? But that's a small percentage. 75% of the apps that have access to your location do not actually need it in order for that app to work properly. Now, we've briefly talked about passwords, but I want to keep going on passwords. Now, we talked about criminals using algorithms to guess our passwords. Now, first and foremost, if you have any of the passwords on the right-hand side of the screen here, I would encourage you to change your passwords. These are the worst passwords that we have. Currently, 23 million people are using the password 123456. That is not a secure password. I would encourage you to come up with a safer password. Now, if you take a look at the left-hand side of this screen here, this password here, right next to phrasing, I love my two dogs. Now we know that it would take the algorithm 150 years to guess this particular password. And the reason for that is because it contains numbers, it contains upper and lowercase letters, and it contains special characters. When you use all of those different characteristics, what it does is it increases the number of possibilities of what that password could be, which in turn makes it much more difficult for an algorithm to guess your password. So that is why when you go to a website, it's always asking you to create some convoluted password that's almost nearly impossible for you to remember. Now, one other item that I want to mention on this slide is right underneath phrasing. It's called multi-factor authentication, MFA. Now, multi-factor authentication is by far one of the safest things that you can do. When multi-factor authentication is available, I strongly encourage you to use it because, again, it is one of the safest ways that you can enter an account. And the reason for that is just the way it sounds. Instead of just using a username and password, it's using multi-factors to authenticate you into an account. So the way that it would work is, let's say I'm trying to sign into, I don't know, American Express, right? I'll go to americanexpress.com, I'll type in my username, my password, and then what's going to happen is American Express is either going to call or text me with an additional PIN number that I need to enter in order to complete the login process. So now I need my username, my password, and this PIN number provided to me via my cell phone in order to log into my account. That makes it much safer and much more secure because, again, it's using multi-factor. So in order for somebody to log into my account, they would have to have my username, my password, and my phone in their possession in order to log in. Now, again, using multi-factor is one of the safest things that we can do. But as we know, when something becomes difficult for criminals to get or utilize, they simply come up with a different methodology, right? They don't just give up on taking our information, they just try to do it a different way. And so now what criminals are starting to do is, because they cannot multi-factor into our accounts, what they've started to do is steal, or the term is technically port, our cell phone numbers onto a different device. So this is kind of how it works, right? let's say here that Vlad is someone that I'm trying to steal or get into one of his accounts. And let's say Vlad has Verizon, and I know Vlad has a Verizon account, right? Because I'm a criminal, I'm a good criminal. I know what I need to know in order to get into my account. So now what I can do is I can call Verizon and I can pretend I'm Vlad, right? Let's just say I'm really good at impersonation. And now I can tell Verizon, hey, this is Vlad. You know, my kid chucked my phone against the wall. It broke. I ran it over with my car. I dropped it in the pool. My dog ran away with it, right? Whatever crazy, sad sob story I can come up with. And now I'm crying to Prudential, right? I'm crying to Verizon. And I'm saying, hey, Verizon, I cannot go a day, even an hour without my phone. I need you to port my number onto this old device I have so that I could still use my phone. It's critical that I use my phone or have access to my phone, right? So now Verizon, wanting to make sure that you still have access to your phone, will take your phone number and port it onto this older device, not realizing that they've just successfully stolen your cell phone number. And now I can multi-factor into your accounts because I have access to your phone number. I have access to that code that I need in order to log in. And this is happening in pretty staggering numbers. So this really started to take off in 2017, and you'll see that it happened about 380,000 times. In 2018, that number doubled to over 679,000 times. So this is a crime that's actively growing. Now, before we throw our phones out and our computers out, one way to protect yourself is actually very simple. The only thing you have to do is call your cell phone provider. Doesn't matter which one you have, AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, Cricket, Boost, doesn't matter. Call your cell phone provider, tell them you would like to create a PIN to secure your mobile device. Now you can have an added layer of protection onto your account. Think of it like a PIN for your debit card. You cannot take money out of an ATM unless you input that PIN number. Well, this works the same. You cannot make any changes to your cell phone account unless you input that PIN number at the beginning of your call. And so what this will do is this will add a layer of security, making it impossible for someone to simply call in and port your number or steal your number onto another device. And again, you can do this at any carrier. And also, this has been a feature that you could add to your cell phone for a number of years prior to this scam even becoming prevalent. So this is not a new technology to the cell phone providers. We just need to take advantage of it now more than we did in the past because criminals are starting to take advantage of it. Okay. Now, let's talk about how we can detect against identity theft. If there's one thing you take from this presentation here today, I hope it is this slide here. If you have been a victim of identity theft, if you have been a victim of a data breach, if you are just suspicious that maybe a piece of mail of yours has gotten lost, or maybe you're waiting for something and it has not yet arrived, whatever the case may be, the best way for you to be able to determine if someone has compromised your information by opening up fraudulent accounts, the best way to determine this or figure this out is to pull your credit report. Now, your credit report is your financial transcript. It has every single line of credit that you have ever opened, whether it is still open today or currently closed. So if someone has opened a fraudulent account in your name, it's going to be on your credit report. Now, all of us are entitled to 3 completely free credit reports every single calendar year. You're entitled to 1 free credit report per credit bureau. So 1 from Experian, 1 from TransUnion, and 1 from Equifax. 3 for the year. And you can actually access these credit reports on the website that you see on the bottom of this slide. So www.annualcreditreport.com. So what we encourage you to do is go on this site and check your credit report every 3 to 4 months, right? You get 3 free for the year, so space them out strategically over the year and check it every 4, 5, 3 months, whatever you have time for, right? So I'll give you an example. Let's say you log on in January to annual credit report, you pull your Equifax credit report, make sure everything on there is accurate, it's correct, it's something that you are responsible for. Then go ahead and wait, right? So maybe April, May, June, go on and pull your second credit report. Pull your Experian credit report. Make sure nothing's changed since the last time you looked in January. Then go ahead and wait 3, 4 months, 5 months, and pull it in September, October, whatever time. Pull your last credit report, your TransUnion credit report. And again, make sure nothing has changed since the last time you looked. Now you can check your report every couple of months completely free of charge, making sure that no one's opened any fraudulent accounts in your name. All right, let's briefly talk about credit card fraud. Now, credit card fraud is really an interesting concept. And the reason for that is because for most of us, when we experience credit card fraud, half the time we don't even consider it fraud anymore, because our credit card carriers have made it so easy for us to reverse the charges that most of the time we call the carrier, we say we're not responsible for those charges, they void them, they send you a new card, and most likely within a couple of days, you probably don't even remember that your card was compromised. One statistic is that in 2019, credit card fraud actually decreased from the previous year. So in 2019, credit card fraud was less than it was in 2018. Now, the numbers were still huge, but we are starting to, for once, trend in a better direction. So instead of increasing, we're starting to decrease. And that's what we want to see. And the reason that we're starting to see a decrease finally in credit card fraud is because we've all now received these fancy chips, these EMV chips embedded in our cards. And these chips make our cards safer and more secure. The way that it works, the way that it previously worked is when you would go to a store, you would swipe the magnetic strip on the back of your card. And what would happen is that credit card machine would send your credit card information in a transaction to your bank, letting them know that you're making a purchase. Right? Makes sense. But what was happening was criminals were able to intercept that transaction and they were able to extract your credit card number. Then they could go and complete their own shopping spree. But now what happens is when you go to a store and you insert your card into the chip reader, now when you insert the chip, instead of sending your credit card information in that transaction, it sends a one-time PIN in that transaction, letting them know that you're making a purchase. Now, if that transaction were to be compromised, your credit card information is never exchanged. So there is no risk, or there's a lot less risk to you as the consumer because you're not exchanging your credit card information in that transaction. That's why your chip is safer and more secure. One thing to note here, though, is that even despite the fact that your card has a chip, if you swipe that magnetic strip, still, even today, you're still sending that credit card information in that transaction. So I would encourage you to avoid any places or pay cash at any places that do not have an active chip reader. Gas stations were a big culprit for this. They did not need to get new chip readers until the end of 2019. So as it stands now, it is illegal for any business to accept a credit card without offering an active chip reader. So keep that in mind. Always, 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 if possible, use that chip. Okay, now one thing that I also want to mention here is I want to talk about phishing. And the reason I want to talk about phishing attempts is specifically because phishing attempts have increased substantially since COVID. And I want to make sure that everyone is aware of phishing and really knows how to defend against phishing attempts. So what I want to do is I want to talk here a couple minutes about phishing. And then what I want to do is I want to show you an example. So first and foremost, when we talk about phishing attempts, there are two types of phishing emails that you receive. One is a little bit more common, or a lot more common than the other. The first, which is less common, is where the phishing attempt, the goal of the attempt is to get you to click on some type of link or attachment in the email to download some type of virus or malware onto your device. Again, this is less common, but this is a type of phishing attempt, right? So what happens is you get an email and there's some type of verbiage in there that's trying to get you to open a link or an attachment in that email. One and critically important thing to know about this type of phishing attempt is you cannot, I stress this, cannot get a virus simply by opening an email. You get a virus by clicking on any links or attachments in that email. So if you've opened up an email and thought to yourself, oh boy, this looks suspicious, I should not have done that, what did I do? Do not panic. Simply delete the email, report it as phishing or report it as spam. As long as you didn't click on links or attachments in that email, you did not do anything to your device. You did not give yourself a virus. You did not download malware. Now, the second type of phishing attempt, which is much, much more common, which is more likely what you will see as a result of this pandemic, is a phishing attempt trying to get you to give away your own personal information. And so this attempt looks as follows. You'll get some type of email that has language in there that says you need to verify your information, you need to activate your account, you need to confirm details, right? Anything where they're asking for you to provide your information. Now, I actually received a phishing email myself pretty recently, and I wanted to just show the group as an example. I think it's a really great way to learn. Now, I know it's a little bit tough to see here, but what you'll notice is that I received a phishing attempt. Now, I took screenshots on my phone, so that's why it's a little bit small here. But what you'll see is I got this phishing attempt from American Express. Now, everything looks the same, right? It comes from an American Express email. And I'll read you what the message says because it's a little bit blurry on the screen, but it says, our records show that your card might have been compromised by an unauthorized third party. An attempt to use your card was blocked today. Therefore, as a security measure, we have placed your card on hold until this concern is resolved. Follow the secure link to complete our security check below. So now what happens is when I click on this verify your recent activity button, it asks me to input my American Express username, my password, my social security number, my birth date, my address, my full name, right? So it's asking me to give away information that American Express should absolutely already have and should absolutely never be asking me to resend it through an unsecure source, through an email. Right, so the request itself is suspicious, but it doesn't necessarily, the email doesn't look that suspicious. But I thought this was strange, right? Because I had used my American Express card earlier that day. I also get notifications every time my card is used. So I thought this was strange. So then what I did was I clicked on the email address because I wanted to see where it was coming from. And when I did that, that's when I noticed. That's when the dead giveaway that this was a phishing attempt, right? So now you'll see, it's hard to see in the first one, but you'll see right underneath the E in Express, there's a little dot underneath it. That's not part of the logo. And then when you really dig in and you click on the email address, you'll see it again. It appears twice. So now I know. Now I know something's wrong. And then I also can see here the email address that it came from, aco4@centurionff.com. That's not an email address that American Express would ever use. So I know that this is a phishing attempt. Now I know it's hard and sometimes you really cannot see. So it's always good to just use your best judgment. But typically in these phishing attempts, in these phishing emails, there will be one very small indication that this is a fraudulent email. In this particular one, I can tell by the logo and the email address. In some of them, you can tell because the English is a little bit off, right? So maybe the tenses of the word is not lining up. So you can tell that maybe it was written by someone where English is not their first language, or it was simply typed into a translator and spit out. So again, there's always usually one or two very small clues in these emails. If you look hard enough, you can find them. But if you don't have the patience, or if you don't want to look for these small clues, the best way to make sure that you do not fall victim to a phishing attempt is just go directly to the source. Now, I know that that might sound confusing, but essentially what I mean by that is go directly to the source. So I received an email from American Express indicating that something was wrong. So if I'm going to believe them, instead of acting through the email that they've sent me, I'm going to go directly to the source. So either I'm going to call American Express, right? I'm going to take my card out and call the number on the back. Maybe I'll go to my phone and log on to my American Express app. Or maybe I'll go to my desktop, go to my browser, and go to americanexpress.com and log in, right? Either way, I'm getting to American Express not from the email that was sent to me. I'm getting to them from a different source. That way I can ask them, hey, is there an issue with my account? Was there fraud? Do I need to change anything? Are you guys all right? Now I can figure out what really is going on. And that's the best way to make sure you don't fall victim to phishing attempts. Go directly to the source, right? If there's something wrong with your Netflix account, close out of the email, go to your Netflix account. Same thing, something wrong with your Amazon, your Apple, American Express, Discover, whatever it might be, close out of the email, open up your web browser, open up your app, call the carriers themselves. That's the best way to protect yourself against phishing attempts. Okay, now the last thing I want to cover today is how can we defend against identity theft? Now, we hope that you do both of these two things. If not both, hopefully you can do at least one. And the first is enrolling in credit monitoring services. So these are companies like LifeLock and Triple Alert. And what they do is they monitor your credit report for you on a daily basis. So what we talked about pulling it every 3, 4, or 5 months, if you have credit monitoring services, you would not actually have to worry about something like this because they're doing it for you every day. Now, typically these services cost anywhere between $20 to $30 a month. And they also provide a little bit of defense for you. So typically the way that it would work is, let's say that I have LifeLock. And let's say that I go to, I don't know, maybe Macy's, right? I go into Macy's and they offer to give me a Macy's store charge card, right? So before I open up this line of credit, they need to make sure I'm a good borrower. Now, when they do that, when they pull my credit report, what's going to happen is my credit monitoring services are going to reach out to me. And they're going to say, hey, Christina, are you trying to open up this Macy's store card? If I say yes, well, then no problem. They'll allow me to open up my card. I can take advantage of my sale. I can be on my way. If I say no, well, then they will actually prevent that account from being open. So they will block that account from being initiated. So again, they are monitoring and playing defense for you. And the last thing these credit monitoring services will do is oftentimes they have some type of liability protection included. So if your information is compromised while you're paying for their services, sometimes they will protect you up to a certain dollar amount. Usually it's like $250,000. I've seen it range all the way up to $1 million. It really just depends on the company, the plan, all of those different things. But they do provide all of those types of services. Couple things I will say about credit monitoring. First and foremost, before you pay for credit monitoring services, make sure you can't get it somewhere else for free. A lot of employers are now starting to offer credit monitoring services as part of their employees' benefits plan. A lot of credit cards will now offer credit monitoring services if you have a certain type of card or certain type of account with them. Also, if you've been a victim of a data breach, a lot of times they will pay for credit monitoring services for you for a few years. So if you are a victim of Equifax, for example, they will pay for 10 years of free credit monitoring services. So that could also be something that you could take advantage of as well. Last thing about credit monitoring services, if you have children or grandchildren under the age of 18 and you have credit monitoring services, I would really encourage you to add your kids to the monitoring services, because a lot of criminals are starting to target children under the age of 18, and having them on your credit monitoring services can just give them that added layer of protection if their information is compromised. Now, the last item on the agenda today, freezing your credit. This is by far one of the safest things that you can do. While your credit is frozen, nobody, including yourself, can open up any additional lines of credit. I personally think the new normal is going to be that people are going to freeze their credit and leave it frozen moving forward, and then they'll unfreeze it when they need to take out new lines of credit. When you freeze your credit, you must freeze it at all three credit bureaus. So Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. If you only close it at one or two of the, if you only freeze it at one or two of the three, well then somebody could still open up fraudulent lines of credit using whichever bureau you have not frozen your credit at yet. When you freeze your credit, you can freeze and unfreeze your credit as many times as you need. There is no limit and there is no cost. It typically takes about 24 to 48 hours to freeze your credit, 24 to 48 hours to unfreeze your credit. Last thing that I will say here, and probably the most important, when you freeze your credit, they will give you a confirmation number. This is going to be one of the most important confirmation numbers you will ever receive, because when your credit is frozen, they will not allow you to unfreeze your credit unless you provide to them the confirmation number they gave you when you froze your credit. And remember, you're going to have three of them, right? One for Equifax, one for TransUnion, one for Experian. So you'll need to keep track of all three of these confirmation numbers. You will be able to unfreeze your credit if you lose these confirmation numbers, but it will not be an easy process. It will take you hours, if not days, maybe weeks, to prove to them who you are to get them to unfreeze your credit. So make sure you keep it in a safe location. Okay. Whew. Now, that is the end of the prepared remarks that I have for you today. We covered a lot of information. I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned a couple of things here today to really help you protect your own information. But with that being said, what I want to do is I want to just be able to open it up to any questions that we might have from any of our participants before I go ahead and close it out and pass it back to Vlad. I'm not sure if the lines are muted or not, but if they are,
yep,
they are.
You can write a question.
Okay, here I can.
There you go.
I'll allow everyone to talk, so I'll unmute their line. So if you have a question, feel free to jump in. One last piece that I want to just show that all of us will have access to. Where's my PDF here? I just want to show everyone here. Oh, this last little piece. Oh, here we go. Check. So we also have a checklist that we can send out to all the attendees. It just has some of the do's and don'ts about what we covered today, but most importantly, in the bottom right here on the back, it has all of the links, the phone numbers, and everything that we talked about today that you can replicate on your own as well. So this is a great little follow-up piece that we can send out as well, and it has a lot of the key items that we discussed this afternoon.
Wonderful.
But all right, well, it doesn't look like we have any questions. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone for dialing in. We really appreciate you spending some time with us this morning. If you have any questions that maybe you are a little shy to ask, by all means, reach out to Vlad. He can get your questions over to me, and I'd be happy to answer them behind closed doors, or not on the line if that's more preferable. But with that, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone, and I will pass it back over to Vlad to go ahead and close us out. Thank you.
Christina, thank you so much. This the level of sophistication and the frequency of attacks have been going on are just staggering. I mean, we constantly, well, I'm not traveling as much right now, but we constantly order things for our clients, and we have credit card charges that come through that I review. And oh my gosh, I mean, constantly receiving emails, oh, here's your invoice from your last order, and you literally can't pinpoint what it was from or for. So it becomes very powerful to just being aware, and if you're not sure, just don't click on it, right? I remember I actually had a personal situation where my mother was setting up an account, and she was asked a verification code to be emailed to her. And purely by a coincidence, she received a phishing text message and a legitimate email, and she wasn't sure which one to click on, so she called me, and I had to walk her through how to navigate through this. I know that at Craner, we spend a lot of money, us and Voya, which is our parent company, on securing everyone's accounts, profiles. This is why we're constantly making changes and told everybody, especially during the pandemic when many people are unemployed and fraud has risen substantially. This is why we're constantly implementing different changes. This is why we send you security emails and ask you to reply to us via security email. This is why we have the Vault and the Financial Concierge dashboard, so that your information is not just being flaunted around the internet. And it's true, Christina, you're right. The crooks are becoming more and more sophisticated, and while at the same time, the safety and precautionary software companies are becoming a lot more savvy as well. So just do know that we take not only pride, but we take ownership of your privacy and your security. We don't share, we don't sell, we don't do anything that we're not supposed to with this information. And with that, if you have any questions, please feel free to give us a call. Again, Christina, thank you very much for being our guest speaker today. You gave me information that I forgot to do. I do need to call back to TransUnion and freeze my credit monitoring service again. So great information. Everyone have a wonderful afternoon, great day. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us. Take care. Bye-bye.